Wait a second. I didn't queue up an intro video. Oh, well.
I didn't either. I probably should have.
It's too late now. We're just going to have to run with it. Yeah.
I'm still full screen for some reason.
Let's
my
act
goodness,
out one of the ones we already know.
Nah, that's fine.
So, getting back to how Mouse ruined comics.
I don't even know the song. Evie picked that out for me a couple years ago. Anyway,
something like bam, bam, bam.
It's very hip hop.
Your 30 seconds are up. No more boomer music.
That's the way it goes. And so we have another Wednesday and another episode of the Mattriarchy. I am today joined by an eclectic group of folks, including forgot the metal is here.
I always have some weird thing as my name.
You typically do, but normally it's a picture and I recognize enough that it's like, oh, okay. And so I was like, oh, here's the metal. It's forgot the topic is with us today.
The metal's
I remember
history.
You told us the topics for like the next 4 or 5 episodes before we left last time, and I completely forgot like all of them.
Yes, that's fine. So we've got the metal, we've got Twitless.
What's up?
We've got Cartoonicus.
Stay tuned.
We have Larry.
Yo.
And everyone's favorite anthropomorphic animal, #1 Marmaduke fan.
No hate watching.
Oh my goodness, that's a trick. We got to go down a little rabbit trail. We got to go down, which I know you're up for, Metal, with your picture there. It's the year of the rabbit trail. Huh? Yeah, that was terrible. Terrible. So anyway,
I will be serving as SFX today.
Oh, excellent. Somebody should. We don't have a budget for a soundboard or anything. In fact, we have no budget at all. That's the fact.
Soundboard's not hard to set up. It's just a matter of picking.
I was gonna say that's what metal is here for.
We were talking about it, but we never decided on sounds or anything. Like I could set up a soundboard.
All right. Well, I'll powwow with you, and we'll come up with some stuff.
Yeah, we'll think of something. We'll pick up some weird. Maybe what we got to do, guys, is maybe Marmotta just like send over just like an 8-minute track of sound effects,
and I'll just
we can drop them into the soundboard.
See, I just use like some jankety, it's probably foreign YouTube downloader. Anything that's legit, it's too hard for me to figure out. So.
I know a guy. I might ask him for some insights. Cider, he's really good at making sound effect bumpers. He does the little bumpers, and he does a really good job at those.
So anyway, tonight's topic, it's loosely titled, Let's Give Them Comics to Talk About. But that's only a catchy title because I thought I wanted to reference the Bonnie Raitt song. So specifically, we wanted to talk about the comics commentariat, the fan community, conversations and about that, and because it's a really fun tie in all of this, the pop culture and hate watching and how that all shakes up to stuff. So that we have, I think, a really fun crowd on that. Fly Fox Pro is in the chat, says Marm is my favorite autist on the internet. So
excellent. I misheard. Yeah, I misheard as a child when someone said I was I thought they said I was artistic.
Was very artistic. Yeah.
So wait, which way did you mishear?
Oh, clearly they were saying I was autistic, right? But
okay. It's like I misheard them, and so I went into this whole path in my life, and I realized it's horrible, and I'm not equipped at all. No, that's not.
I mean,
true.
it's definitely the right stat loadout for an artist.
For an artist.
These days, everybody's autistic. It's fashionable.
That it is really.
I believe
trendy.
the term is neurodivergent.
Well,
actually,
yeah.
I thought neurodivergent was supposed to be broader for like I don't think. I want to be special. I need a special term.
Right? Yeah. I'm OCD, even though it's not diagnosed.
Yeah, it's self.
I'm quirky.
Isn't okay. So since everybody's thought processes are different in some shape or another, wouldn't everybody be neurodivergent? I mean, none of us are
Well,
Plato's
depends on what you
ideal
depends.
form. You know,
It depends on what you establish as normative, and unfortunately, that's where we've just opened up the can of worms.
Well,
see, neurodivergent starts a nesting series of definitions because neurodivergent is the range and spectrum of neuroatypical behavior.
But who isn't atypical?
Are
If we
you
all bring our heads
suggesting
together
that
and we
human
think,
beings can't be fit in a box?
I
if
am.
we
I mean, they can
come up with a good plan, we can
yes.
be neuroconvergent.
Neuroconvergent. I like. Also, it depends on the size of the box. Let's be completely honest, because
Correct.
some people take bigger boxes than others, and I'm
would
not
also
going to
say
name
that-
any names, but there's two people in this panel that I know that would not fit in the same size box.
Well, I was also going to say that
Probably
unfortunately,
more than that. But.
if you go too far with that thinking, it's unfortunately where a lot of social justice thinking comes from, where they go, "You can't put me in a box. I am," and then they come up with 500 genders.
Yeah, your own box.
So, like, categorization, although some of us rebel against some of the conventional categories, if we don't have them, society basically becomes Sodom and Gomorrah really fast.
Right.
So.
Fair enough.
What I was specifically saying is that the fact that
That's not a good reference for. That's not a good reference for social justice writing, though.
Yeah. Also true. But what I was saying specifically, since none of us are that platonic ideal, right? Then everybody. I mean, it's a useless title to say you're neurodivergent. It's
That
like
is
one of those
completely
things.
false. Every woman I've ever met said that I was definitely a platonic friend. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Not every. I am the platonic ideal.
Of the friend zone.
Come on, not every woman, Twitless. I do know that at least one bucked the trend.
That is true.
I feel like we're about to get a platonic pickle tonight.
Actually, I have to take that back. I think she considered me that until I convinced her otherwise. So.
Oh, there you go. Did you show up with a ring like enough times and she's finally like, oh, I guess.
No, I actually, funnily enough, I convinced her. I used persuasion techniques. It was very interesting.
Oh man. 20. That sounds like an amazing story for some other time.
Yeah, exactly.
I know the story.
And I realize I say that out loud and it sounds super dismissive, and I don't mean it that way. It's just not germane to our topic, and I feel like if we drift too far out of the field, we'll never actually say anything worth listening to. And we have people listening.
Everyone wants to hear about my dating life. That is, what are you talking
about? But isn't this intro really a big tease for our topic on how nobody wants to talk about what's actually happening in comics?
Well, there you go. That's some next level thinking. I appreciate that. Thank you, Larry, for coming along and bringing us to that place there.
So let's go outside the box and talk about comics.
Okay, so the original topic idea of is nobody talking about comics? Larry brought it up in our creators chat group there on Twitter. So Larry, I'm going to give you the floor to kind of make your case. Say your piece, describe your truth, and then we'll take it apart piece by piece. I mean, discuss it.
Oof. So the eponymous Richard C. Meyer, aka your boy Zach from the Sunny D Factory, postulated that the culture of consumers, fans, aficionados, whatever, comics has changed from the 2010s and earlier, when internet culture we'd say, this is terrible. Dan Slott is literally ruining Spider-Man. Well, we would also talk about what Dan Slott was doing in Spider-Man. We would talk about, hey, this story is really neat. We would be engaged in, the material of the comics. And right now, we're interested more in Dan Slott is a lazy and terrible human being who's literally ruining everything he touches. And we're not talking about what Dan Slott actually writes. So that's the topic, is why comics has went away from talking about the actual text of the fiction and is talking about all of the drama and nonsense around the text of the fiction.
And I think that's an interesting position. I would like to point out some stake on some contrary basis on that. For one, this show exists, but we're small fish in a ridiculous pond. So I mean, you can't even hardly look at that.
Mm.
But I mean, even before I started doing this show, Mom was doing comic reviews, and we've got channels like Thinking Critical that they do a lot of bitching about comics, but they do talk about plot points and why they think they're terrible. Perch does his thing, which is very similar. Does the mini reviews on stuff too. So I think there are people that are talking about comics, but one of the things you brought up that I thought was so interesting is you mentioned that on social media, like people just they're making these flat commentaries rather than making cases.
Right.
And I thought that is an interesting point of view. What does everybody else think about that perspective?
What do you mean by the difference between a case and a flat point of view?
So if you say, well, obviously Vita Ayala sucks and she's the worst thing to ever happen to comics, period, and that's your whole statement, that doesn't really back up your statement, right? So
you're talking about the difference between logic, reasoning, and sense.
Okay.
Right.
A direct statement of your position as opposed to an argument for your position. Okay.
Right.
An internet culture involving dialogue, discourse, and debate.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I think one thing specifically to go back to on this is I didn't really have a dog in the fight because I'm totally zoned out of it. But I watched some of the Twitter spats that people had regarding She-Hulk, the TV show, right? And there was there were 3 takes that I saw on it. One was, I love this, it's the best. One was, this was the worst thing ever, and one was, okay, those people that are saying it's bad are right, but the reason they're saying it's bad isn't right, and the people that are saying they're good aren't right, but the reasons they're giving for why it is good are the reasons it's bad. Right? So there were a few people who would have that third position where it was actually like looking at the material, looking at the layout of the show, looking at the production values, looking at the source material. But that was like 7 people I saw on Twitter. Everybody else was like in these camps, right?
Before we get too much further, I think we are want to clarify when you say comics, we are talking about mainstream like Marvel, DC, right? Because because when we talk about the entire like format of words with pictures attached to them, that's a very separate conversation. And
I definitely think that that's the case. I think there are some, or at least I'm not sure if there are any more. But go back to 2019, there were a few indie books that would kind of cross that line, like Man Eaters, for example, was an early example of people just staking out their positions, and just fighting on those rather than actually engaging in the material, right? But for the most part, I think mainstream books were the ones that kind of cater. I don't know, cater. They seem to be the nexus for this kind of thing. If I'm perceiving things correctly.
Well, and also you're also talking about the West, because like people are talking about manga from both a critical standpoint all the time. It's just a better, bigger industry than this one is here, and have more fans now.
Also, within the concept of the mid majors in the comics industry, when was the last time Image came up with a comic book that really got people talking about, wow, this art's really good. Wow, these stories are really good.
Man, that's a tough one. I can't think of the last Image book that people were really going on about.
What's the one? It's the one where they were the space opera one with the lady with the horns and the dude with the wings.
Saga. That and is Someone's Killing the Children. Got a lot of buzz, but I'm not sure if that was Image. That was one of the other publishers, but I'm not sure if that was Image.
Yeah, I read some of that. It was quite forgettable.
Yeah.
Well, people loved it and hated it, but they were talking about it, right? So that's that's something.
Boom. That one's Boom Studios.
Boom. Okay, that's right. Yeah. I remember that now.
I don't think it's controversial to say that I guess there's like the commentariat side of the question, and there's the comic side of the question. Like there's what people are making, what people are talking about. I don't think it's controversial to say that the industry is moving towards manga. Like go to Barnes and Noble, shelf, manga, and then one little shelf for anything that isn't manga, right? The Zoomers The Zoomers voted with their feet.
It's more than one little shelf. We can talk about the ascendancy of manga without overstating and being like,
sure,
comics get like 2, like it's like manga is definitely, like I said, rising.
Sure,
and it could depend on which barns.
There's like the scholastic market, right? There's like this whole separate market of kind of like autobiographical comics aimed at kids. Telga Meyer's Smile, non-superhero dominated, right? So, and maybe I guess Richard C. Meyer is the one who prompted this discussion. So the Richard C. Meyer subculture is a Marvel DC focused subculture. So to that subculture, the rise of manga feels like this big, weird thing that's kind of like intruded into the what was normally just a superhero hobby. But the world of comics has always been much bigger than that.
I mean, getting into why manga has become successful right now in the United States, it's a whole other vein of conversation. It's
so my thoughts on this, because I think there's a lot of people who've talked about the usual suspects, and I think there's a lot to I think there's truth in that. The usual suspects of, creators being jerks, not developing audiences, the industry itself being slow to change, the social justice that just doesn't work for, that's very alienating. But I just did some reading recently. It was even today that gave some very interesting insights. And I think that it actually plays into the ascendancy of manga and also into some of what we ended up seeing in the mainstream industry. I've got a couple of quotes, but essentially I can boil down my arguments to 9/11 really messed a lot of people up in their heads. And especially since a lot of the mainstream industry was seated in New York, it explains a lot of, I think, of what happened to our superheroes and why the creators felt alienated from those superheroes. And then by extension, so did we. So I got a couple of quotes here, and I think it is... this is around the time where they developed Civil War. And Tom Brevoort stated that Mark Miller talked about how they purposefully were playing off of post 9/11 Patriot Act kind of, ideas. But this journalist by the name of Robert Wolanski is quoted as saying, "In a post-September 11 world, even the phrase 'look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane' sounds different. Its awe has been replaced by shock and revulsion. The sense of escapism comic books provided no longer exists. The fantasy world must give way to the real one." Now, I'm not just saying that I agree with that sentiment. What I am saying is that I think a bunch of people in New York ended up being influenced by those sentiments. And then they ended up needing to work out their very real traumas that they experienced through those events. And we ended up here. Where the real world essentially became escapism died. And I think a lot of people, even Richard Meyer talked about the idea of no escapism is what he called it. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that there are some people who worked in the industry or who were, commenting on it, who directly recognized that. And I think that when you look at what America's psyche went through, I think it helps explain, like I said, of ultimately how we ended up here. I think 9/11 really messed people up. And that's something that I experienced it at a distance. A lot of us experienced it, but we experienced it at an extreme distance. But if you talk to people, or if you hear people from New York talk about it, like they talk about it very differently. It's gotten to the point now where people can make jokes about it. But if you're from New York, you don't joke about that. Or at least not in the same way. And I don't know. That was something that I felt, like I said, just reading that even today made me kind of think about things in a new way I hadn't thought about before.
It was a shattering of the idyllic world of the 90s. So if you were a baby boomer, you were coming off of, like if you're a boomer conservative, you're coming off of the Reagan years. There's all this talk about, is this the end of history? Are we in a permanent sort of capitalist utopia now? And then 9/11 becomes this sort of shocking wake-up call to you. So to a person with a formulated worldview, like to a kid, it's traumatizing in the way that any bad news is traumatizing. But to a person who's grown and kind of has a centered worldview, things seem normal, everything seems okay. that event becomes a world-changing experience.
But now, what are you saying is the result of it? Are you just saying that nobody likes superheroes anymore?
No, what I'm saying I think it's a little more complex than that. It's the idea that, again, I think it's very important to. I think it cannot be understated how important it is that for the superhero industry, which is for a lot of people their entire conception of comics in America,
right?
How much of it centered around the idea of New York. Marvel puts all their characters in New York. It is just New York.
Yeah.
And DC essentially puts them in New York, but then uses the metaphor of Metropolis and Gotham. I believe I forget who said this, but it's basically there's a comment from a comic book creator who said, Gotham is, Metropolis is New York by day, and Gotham is New York by night. And so even if it wasn't physically located there, the people's head spaces and what they were drawing from, and the fact they just lived in New York, populated so much of that. And when you read, I forget what issue the number is exactly, but it's the Spider-Man that's right after 9/11, the black cover. Yeah. Just the mental fallout of what they're trying to process. And like I said, that sentiment from that journalist, I think, does ring home a little bit. And then you get these creators afterwards who make things like Civil War. And we talked about on the Civil War show when we were lampooning it, we talked about how what a big, I think some of us said, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought some of us kind of said how Civil War was partially responsible for a downturn in superhero. Well, then this insight makes even more sense, because 9/11 is what led to people like Tom Brevoort and company, I think, going, you know what? I think this is the world we live in. Mark Miller in particular was, basically saying, I look around the world. What did he say? For some guys, what did he say? I think the reason that story came about, Civil War, is obviously, any writer writes about what influences them. And for some guys, that might be old comics, or it might be old movies or whatever. But for me, generally, it's the world I live in. Well, the world that he and most people in the comic book industry lived in was a devastated New York. And that had all that terror, buildings fall down. And it's hard to basically say, look, Superman's going to save us. And like I said, there's been quite a bit of writing done on how, like I said, just wrecked people's heads.
So, but ultimately, what is the result you're saying that had on comics or on superhero comics?
Well, like I said, if the writers and creators who used escapism of the superhero can no longer do that, and they're alienated from that superhero, what is left to do with the superhero? What's to deconstruct him or her, to make it real somehow, to work out your issues? Because Superman, this happened in the Spider-Man, the 9/11 Spider-Man issue. They look at Spider-Man, they say, where were you? And it's this weird moment, because there's a scholar who talks about this and says that the superhero can only witness tragedy, which is the idea that because Superman isn't real, whenever he interacts with the real world, because he does kind of exist in our imagined real world, and this is where things get blurry, Superman can only, or in this case, Spider-Man can only act as witness, because if he actually had the powers that he had, and he was actually in New York, he obviously would have done something, right? He could have saved lives. He could climb walls. He could have created webs to the people who were jumping out of the buildings, right? But he's not real. And so therefore, he has to be put in this very awkward position. And like I said, the impact of that is like I said, I think a disillusionment. And I think that disillusionment impacted the storytelling, which was why we get stuff like Civil War. And that disillusionment eventually becomes the audience reacting negatively. And I think the cycles that we've seen, that's my thesis.
You are talking about how the audience feels about modern superhero storytelling being negative.
No, it's more nuanced.
The creator, the creator, not the audience.
So I think it's still
because the creator is New York centric.
It eventually
it's still a form of escapism.
To Cartoonicus's point, it eventually becomes the audience's negative reaction, but it starts with the creator. The creator being so alienated from it.
The final.
Well, no.
So you have the comic creators. A lot of them come out of the political space where this terrorist attack came out of a blowback for U.S. foreign policy over multiple decades. So the poison came into them of the very concept of a superhero that would be out there righting wrongs, being good, being moral, being just. Civil War came out of that period. Wasn't that the period where the Authority really first came out and
Not
started
first,
being?
but not first. I mean, yeah, the Authority was first edgy '90s stuff, but it definitely gained a certain level of. I mean, it was in the space, in the milieu, as so to speak. But yeah, I mean, and that's
they were very like, interventionist. We're gonna like go and like take out the rogue nations and stuff. I recall.
But I have an interesting 9/11 related thesis to this that's kind of amusing to me. So Vietnam, we didn't know how to write or talk about Vietnam until the mid '80s, until like 10 years after we pulled out of Vietnam.
Until after Rambo. I mean, that was really the first work that.
Funny you should mention that, because Stan Lee talks about how he tried to write specifically Iron Man during Vietnam and had to backpedal on it.
The Park Is Mine was the first one that really started the process. Rambo was also in that same time frame. I don't remember exactly when Rambo came out, but it took all of that, and then Rambo First Blood Part 2 was really, us trying to come up with a catharsis to try to come up with that. But for 9/11, there hasn't been a victory. We haven't, had terrorism sign a peace treaty, and there's no more terrorism. Our FBI has now become part of the bureaucracy of Twitter and is silencing domestic political speech because it could be cause for a terrorism. So since there's no end to the war, there's no way for us to digest it into our zeitgeist. We don't have an answer. So there's no way for the artist to represent the zeitgeist. Then we get into the fact that comics authors are becoming more and more insular, more and more part of a network of nepotism, that they're even less connected to the zeitgeist of what people feel and experience.
In contrast to World War II, where you have a clean end, and then it's easy to make Nazis into cartoon bad guys because they become a thing we beat. We did.
Well, it's also important that most of World War II, apart from Pearl Harbor, happened on not on our soil. So it was a war that, I mean, people have written, and we've seen it in our fiction, about how Grandpa came home and doesn't talk about it. Yeah. Well, if Grandpa comes home and doesn't talk about it, then in a sense, there's almost a disconnect, and so people could live in almost blissful ignorance of some of that. If you were in Europe and your village was bulldozed like that, that ain't happening.
So maybe like to take it outside of the American context, the best similar examples I can think of is World War I decimates Europe, and you can see a change in the content of European art after World War I. Like Monet was criticized for painting water lilies while World War I is going on. For Japan, it's Hiroshima and Nagasaki that has a psychological wham on anybody of a certain age. And so for a while, every Japanese movie and a lot of the manga creators of the mid-century it's sort of like the mental picture of the nuclear bomb is fixated in their mind because it's a real thing to them.
Right. I mean that
it isn't until the generation that came from the economic miracle period in Japan that they really start to get away from that.
But now, interestingly enough, that nuclear activity ended up also giving birth to things like Godzilla, which would ultimately become the most ridiculous escapism you can imagine, I would think.
It's a mix. It's a mixture of escapism and then still exercising those demons. Still to this day, Shin Godzilla is basically nothing but the same old. I'm not even saying this negatively.
No, I know what you mean, but
it's
right
back to nuclear Holocaust imagery.
Am I the only one who feels like it has returned very recently? That there was a big
it's
in the middle there where it's
been there all the whole time.
The ghost of the bomb, the shadow of the bomb is it's the template upon which, or the back of the canvas, I should say, the canvas upon which Akira was painted. It's the groundbreaking the foundation for Astro Boy. I mean, it's in gobs of of Japanese pop culture stuff.
Nausicaa.
Barefoot Gen, I think, is one of the big ones.
It's kind of the setting for Fist of the North Star as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
to Marm's point, yes, I think that 9/11 is our big scar.
Still trying to get to the end result of this, though, is that you're saying this leads to a lack of escapism in comics. What is it that you're saying that leads to that is the reason that no one talks about superhero comics?
Exactly that, right? It logically follows, right? If the creators are so alienated that they write alienating works, and then the audience becomes alienated from it, and they feel like there's nothing to escape to because all their scars are in the escapism itself, what is there to talk about?
So you are saying that it is
you literally have to
escape superhero comics.
Right, you have to escape from the conversation.
That's
at
what
that point.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to where we're at.
So as I said, it is leading to a lack of popularity of the genre.
It makes a lot of, and what are people escaping to? They're escaping to a type of literature that is so far removed from their experience that there's almost no point of reference. They're escaping to Japan, and it's like, and Japan has fanciful stuff that has, and sometimes you can dive in and be like, this has nothing to do with my experience as an American, but there's basics of adventure, and I could connect to that. I love this. Even though I don't understand any of the references. In fact, it's actually good that I don't understand any of the references because I don't have to be weighed down by psychological traumas that I don't know.
How omnipresent does it have to become before you can definitively say, like, so it's one thing to say 9/11 impacts the people who work at Marvel and DC. It impacts them directly, and the impact shows in their work. But, concurrently with Civil War, there's Marvel's superhero. So so like the problem is if we're not paying attention to the stuff they make for 9-year-olds because we're interested in the cerebral stuff, then we're not paying attention to the goofy, child-centric, genuinely escapist works, right? Like I totally buy that 9/11 impacts Marvel Studios in particular and the superhero genre broadly, but I do feel like there's been a concurrent escapist-centric line of work going on.
So I don't want to say that I don't want to be too, I guess, overstate the idea that I'm saying. It's not that no one has ever escaped since 9/11. What I'm saying though is that I think that with the Marvel and DC people being in New York, I think that dramatically impacted the trajectory, and I think it's had that impact that your porn star Zach has recently has said.
I missed some lore apparently, and I don't want to know it.
But that
I heard about it, but I don't want to know about it either.
Anyway, I still like his takes sometimes. But it's funny to laugh at. Anyway, no, but when he said like, oh, no escapism, and it's like, well, I think this explains some of that trajectory.
Now there's another.
I think on here, I'll take an alternate take on, and I'm not sure we're going to have time to really hash it out, but I'm just going to go ahead and lay it out there. Sure. I think escapism in itself is something of a mistake for a culture to embrace escapism for its own sake. And I think that's and I'm not saying like the occasional dumb movie. You don't have to necessarily grab, gobs of truth about your life from Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion. But that doesn't. I don't know why I thought about that one.
That was a very interesting choice.
Yeah, it was weird. I haven't seen it in like 25 years. Or Nick Cage movies aren't necessarily known for being complex. I just watched a bunch of them last week. But I think that by and large, escaping doesn't actually like prepare you for anything. And I think that like if we are looking to heroes. If Marvel fans, if comic fans and comic writers are looking to the heroes to save them from things that are a normal part of life, and tragedy is a normal part of life, then they are always going to be like preparing themselves for trauma, not for dealing with trauma.
On a small scale, yes, but I do have to push back against the idea that because tragedy is a part of life, because death is, that 9/11 was something like 9/11 was like that.
But in the history of the world, like large scale tragedies, having being the last remaining member of your village because they've been pillaged by barbarians, that's normal. Like that's a typical part of history.
True, but the scale of 9/11 does
the scale of 9/11 is like 1 month in Chicago.
No, it is notable for one day. I remember having a conversation with someone from Europe.
It is notable for one day. That's true.
And I remember saying, "Oh, we lost 3,000 people in one day," and the person from Europe said, "That can't be right." And I said, "No, 3,000 one day." And he said, "Really?" And like we both double checked, and he was like, he went, "Holy cow!" So yeah.
Now I want to say I think 9/11 was the ignition, but what I think the ultimate fuel of our current crisis is that comic books as a medium is written by people who think they're writing for teenagers, but they're writing from their own experiences in the 20s and selling to people in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
So I also have to push up against the idea that the comics were always just for kids, because they weren't.
Well, no, that's not what I'm pitching.
Because like World War II vets constituted a large bit of that audience, and it's vets and immigrants and people who are much older have always been a part of that audience.
Well, these Tumblr arenas definitely think they're writing for teenagers.
Yeah. What I'm pitching is
we're gonna miss seeing it, but later, Fly Fox, have a good night.
Yeah, good to talk to you.
But what I'm pitching is Marvel and DC think that their goal is to shoot for the younger audience, so that they have a new multi-generational consumer.
Mm-hmm.
The younger audience, which is more diverse, more into gender stuff, more into alternate religious stuff, the whole shebang and bang.
They think that. At least
they think that.
And that carries over to millennials too. Like millennials aren't teenagers anymore.
Right.
Millennials are
we're not
people now.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You blink and you're like, wow, I'm old.
The authors and artists are drawing inspiration from primarily their late teens, early 20s to the work that they're aiming for teenagers. And the audience that's buying the comics are people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
With a few specific exceptions.
Right.
Which is one of the things that's been a bugaboo in the commentary for me, is when people bag on like Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur for being a stupid comic. It's aimed at 9-year-old girls who buy it at Scholastic book fairs. So,
but how many?
That's fine. It still doesn't justify some of the stupidity of tying it to Marvel canon and some of the stuff that I've seen her featured in that had nothing to do with her mainstream title.
Yeah,
via Inhumans versus X-Men. But
it's also pretty bad for a 9-year-old story. So
okay, I
haven't read it. The look looks like it's made for kids.
That's probably fair.
Visually it's fine.
The comic run of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, because I actually was reading that. Okay, from what I read of it. I actually thought that was a more solid series. That was like 2018, early, Comicsgate blowing up era. I was reading my way through that. The mainline Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, they were playing her as kind of an awkward, sort of like coded autistic kid who's really bright and ahead of her class, and she's stuck in a lame public school, and so Devil Dinosaur is like, that's her way to use her mind to her full extent, because school's too boring for her. Then in like guest appearances, people clearly didn't get like the memo on that. She just became cool, tough, minority character number 1027.
Who also has to be smarter than Reed Richards, even though she's written by people who are like below middle grade intelligence.
That was extremely awkwardly handled. So
there is an entire conversation to be had about that plateau 120 people trying to write smart people that we could have, and I could swear like the room blew about shows like The Big Bang Theory, which is a midwit's imagining of what a smart person might be like, and it's the most insulting thing I've ever seen.
So like
I called it Nerd Beverly Hillbillies or Nerd the Jeffersons.
I think the line for me with Moon Girl that just was very hard for me to see past, because like some of this gets into we could get into nitpicking, right? But when they had Moon Girl, woman-splained to Forge, whose genetic mutation is I can intuitively invent things, and then they have Moon Girl scratch some things in the dirt and be like, "I fixed your invention."
Yeah,
and it was just like, it was literally just her with a stick, like, and it was in the dirt, and I was just like, this is retarded.
I want to articulate what the problem with it is, because I liked that she had a flaw. Her flaw was that she didn't get people. She's super smart, but she doesn't get people. So there's a nice poetic relation to that. Their problem was they confused high IQ with being omnicompetent. So if you're a 13-year-old and let's say that she's a 13-year-old and she has the highest IQ in the universe, that doesn't mean that she's an expert in physics, because high IQ people have to read things before they understand things. She just basically magically understood everything. So that was the midwit problem.
Can I ask
I actually do this in one of my stories too, right? Because I have a little 9-year-old character who is highly competent for a 9-year-old, because he's like a superhero flying brick type thing, but he's still a 9-year-old. So it doesn't matter if he's got like the intelligence of a genius or anything. He only has the experience that a 9-year-old have. So like at one point when he's like taking out the bad guys, he decides to throw a ball of plasma at the control console of their helicopter because he's a 9-year-old. And that causes the whole helicopter to go down. He has to jump out of the helicopter first to try to catch it, and even like slaps himself in the head because kids don't know anything like at all.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is about being smart is it basically just means that your brain sorts faster. That's it. So it's you still have to have all of the education that goes into that.
Yeah,
there's also be able to take the time to process it out.
There's also there's also that conflation of knowledge, wisdom, and like innovative genius, right?
Yep.
So a knowledgeable person can simply be someone who's just is a collection of data and facts, which is fine, but you just read a lot and you can just seem smarter that way, and you'll be smarter in a sense, but you won't necessarily be able to do what the other people can do. But with wisdom, you are able to take knowledge and experience and apply it to make the best decisions with things, which is why age tends to be an important factor with that, because experience only comes with age. So it's very difficult for younger people to achieve wisdom, though not impossible. And then innovative genius is where someone is able to intuit, or they have a special mind that's able to just grasp things that haven't even yet been explained. So you get some of those those Greeks who are able to just kind of invent sciences without prior explanation. They were just able to kind of just work it out. Or work it out with little bits of standing on the shoulders of giants. So those are 3 categories though. And unfortunately in fiction, we often get them boiled down to just, I'm the smartest in the universe, which by the way, totally is a racial overstepping of Amadeus Cho, who was supposed to be the world's smartest ever until Moon Girl came around and scratched some lines in the dirt. Which to me was just it was comedy is what it was.
Okay. You and your Cho fanning, you can just calm down.
I'm not Cho fanning. I think Reed. Okay, here's my hot take. Victor Von Doom is actually the smartest brain in the Marvel universe, and Reed can go,
he's a close. Reed is a close second.
Yeah, Reed can put that in his pipe and smoke it.
Doom is the closest to the most omnicompetent person in all of Marvel.
That is correct.
Yeah, and I think part of it, the thing about separates Doom and Reed, I think, is that Doom's narrow focus and his arrogance offset his hubris, his intelligence.
Correct.
And I think whereas Reed is willing to ask all of the questions. And so he comes across as smarter because he's willing to ask the questions.
Reed is willing to be wrong, and Victor is not, and that is the main. Yeah. That's the main.
And that's a great. And guys, stop. I know this is totally off topic, guys, but think about what a great dynamic that has in play, and how nobody has played with that for a decade. I mean, that's drama waiting to happen right there on the page, people. What's going on, man?
While we're asking that, you might as well ask this, and that is, why is it, whether in comics or cartoons, every kid character has to be a genius, no matter what?
Have you read Rousseau?
Have I read what?
Have you read Rousseau?
I have not.
The philosopher.
What Rousseau teaches is that children actually have
That's
wisdom.
right. Yeah.
And that
then
society
corrupts
strips
us.
wisdom away from the children.
So we're going back to
That's why the
it's
children have to lead us. It's a thing that came in the 60s.
And so because of that, Dexter has a lab in his back.
the child.
That's just good.
The
Dexter's
romantics.
lab is just good fun.
Peter Parker is able to invent micro, webbing.
No.
Also, Dexter is that pure example of somebody who has that intuitive genius, but is actually an idiot because he doesn't get literally anything else in life, and that's usually his foil.
Yeah, I'm just saying, it is hard to find a major character in cartoons or comics who, as a kid, who doesn't immediately fall into that genius.
That's
Anya from Spy X Family.
There's actually plenty.
Yeah,
I know
anime not with his stand.
No, it's a meme, but there's plenty in Marvel and DC. It used to be the genius used to be the rare. It was like the token genius. It started becoming the reason why you started getting so many more of them was because it became a fan fiction route to very quickly establish how important your character was, especially if that character was new, and especially if that came from an author who was new to writing superhero comics. It was just like boilerplate for, I want to introduce blank into the Marvel Universe. How do I introduce blank into the Marvel Universe? Well, either it's usually a she, is going to be stronger than whoever is around, or smarterer, or both. And that's why you saw an increase in it. And suddenly Amadeus Cho was the smarterest, and now Moon Girl is, and then Shuri was, and now it's going to be like they'll invent like 4 others.
Okay, I want to think related to that. Okay, related to all the new characters. So this is this SJW Marvel conversation over again. So I want to here's some pushback. What if they don't care? What if the only point is to IP farm, basically? So who cares if Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur is well thought out? We're just going to come up with the character of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, and we'll hope Disney will sort this out when they do the inevitable Netflix adaptation or whatever adaptation.
That's actually the third leg of my stool of my argument, which is the streamification of how they've written comic books. Everybody's writing a show to be a streaming show, and within the limitations and constraints of a low streaming show budget with their writing style. That's why you get a lot of the manga stuff about food and everybody making references to Gilmore Girls and dumb stuff like that. It's because that's the sort of thing that would play well in a streaming show environment. So you have comics authors who don't want to write about grand heroic narratives. They also don't want to say, listen, the reason Spider-Man can't fight 9/11 is because he's fighting Dr. Octopus and a giant octopus robot. They're not using any of those things because they can't engage in that sort of realistic storytelling. They're trying to still tell the wrong kind of stories to the wrong audience and have authors who don't even understand how to tell it to the audience that they intend to tell it to. And everybody's writing to write a Netflix show, but they, instead of writing something cool and awesome with a big budget and then peeling that down to fit a Netflix show budget, they're writing things at a low Netflix budget. So it's unimaginative dreck written for the wrong people by people who don't want to even write those kind of stories.
I'm going to push back just a teensy bit. I think that only some, I don't know the exact percentages anymore, but I think that a percentage of them don't know. And so I do think that's accurate, because when Marvel is literally trolling Tumblr for, hey, what are your pronouns? Okay, do you want to write, the next Marvel title? It's clearly like the bar has been lowered. But that being said, there is a chunk of them, including Mark Waid, who know how to write a story and know how to write a good one, in fact, and have chosen to not, it's by choice. And so I think going back to the 9/11 thing, I think some of it is them, like I said, it's the impact of trauma. And I think for some of it is jumping on trends. I think Mark Waid has made comments about how, you only get kicked out of comics if you can't stick with the times, essentially. And I think that some of what we've seen in Mark Waid's recent, writing, right, that some people have criticized and said this is garbage. And it's like, well, it's because he is sticking with the times, and that's why he keeps getting work. So there's still, I still think there's broader cultural things going on that's impacting at least some of these guys.
Is he the guy who got in a big argument on Twitter with Rob Liefeld?
No. He got big arguments on Twitter with a whole bunch of people because he has serious emotional control issues.
Yeah,
he also went to one of the editor-in-chiefs at a comic book company he worked at and destroyed everything in his office. He then set him
up. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, he then set a black wreath to the said person on the anniversary of his wife's death. Mark Waid has serious mental health issues.
He's a jerk. He's a man-child. I know that. And I hate defending him, but he's written some good stories before.
Yeah, let me
Captain America, The Flash.
Let me go to your point there, Twitless. Some of that I think is when you're a creator, you're part of the culture of the narrow, tiny pool of creators. So if you put Mark Waid in his prime into a pool with 100 gender-neutral Vita Ayalas, it's going to break down the quality of his work. Just because he's in that pool, listening to those people and wanting to keep up with that. And then you get into corporate politics of like, well, why is Mark Waid writing all of these stories and selling so many more comics than us? It's clearly that you're not wanting to help, these underprivileged minority, blah, 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 blah. So I think that those levels are also components of it, but it gets back to the core of nobody's willing to write these stories. They don't know what audiences they're selling it to. And a lot of the people who are writing are just trying to get into Hollywood.
Here's the thing.
Oh, and I think, not to totally interrupt you, Cartoonicus, but I'm going to do that. We have from the chat, one of the things I want to point out was Mrs. H says, sounds like comics have a genre issue where writers are writing comics out of the genre. If they want to write slice of life characters from a superhero universe, they need to do that under their own title and then an appropriate genre. And I think that's actually a big factor. It was, I mean, like slice of life comics within the DC universe exist, and Marvel existed in backups or even within the stories. I mean, like some of the best, romance stuff that Marvel has done in the last 20, 30 years was Peter and Mary Jane in between action adventure stuff. There was like just day of the life, going shopping, hanging out with the wife, that kind of stuff. It was 100% slice of life stuff. And the fanboys ate it up because it was sandwiched between adventure stories, So I think there's ways of doing that. But I think sometimes you have writers that are approaching that. And I think Twitless's thesis that 9/11 may have been part of the issue is a real one, but also the fact that writers appreciate or are wanting to deal with those things. Now, with those other genres, and one conversation that I have had with many people is I think if you want to do the genre cross or right outside of genre within that thing it's got to be both things. You've got to have real superhero action and real human drama together, or it comes up flat. And Captain Cummings in the chat pointed out, was talking about Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man does a great job of balancing the many loves of Dobie Gillis life of Denji with the absolute hyper-violence gore of Chainsaw Man. And bouncing between those really well, at least in the first 5 volumes, which is all I've read so far. But sorry, I totally interrupted you there, Cartoonicus, and I'm sorry, Larry, but I wanted to give him a chance to keep going.
You gave me something else to bring up, interestingly enough, there though, because this may be one of the reasons, one of the areas in which anime and manga is kind of kicking our butts in this, is that we have one genre that basically comprises, and 2 companies total, that comprises what we call the mainstream comic book industry. And I don't even know why we call that. It's not even the most successful or popular anymore. Whereas in Japan, they have a million genres that you can pick through. And that means nobody's writing for the wrong genre. They're just writing whatever they want to write. And then marketing it to the people who need it.
What you're fighting there is not just the comic book industry at that point. What you're fighting is, and I encourage, there's some good if you want to do some more research into that, there's some books written about the history of the children's picture book in America, which is very, very helpful in in contextualizing how the American Western and specifically the American approach to picture storytelling. And if you go past that, you can also start digging into just Western philosophy and just how we approach the icon. And then you essentially get to the breaks with the Greek Orthodox Church, which is basically this idea. It goes all the way back to like freaking Plato, where it's, you know, the image is a lie and the image is, you know, we treat it with suspicion. And that whole lineage, you know, carries over into a lot of Western thinking and thought. And when it gets into America, we end up with the Puritans.
It's like the idea of so maybe not the Puritans, but the idea that people who think in pictorial images are lower IQ than people who think in pure abstract thought.
Or
right?
yeah, that type of thing. But there's also a moral aspect to it. Like I said, with Plato and such, the image is deceptive. Whereas, you know, rhetoric, you know, working through things out through reason and truth is not. Whereas the image can misrepresent something. The grapes that have been painted to look so photorealistic like grapes are not really grapes. That's a deception. And so, like I said, not to get too far into the philosophy weeds, when you get into America, you get the Puritans who have been influenced by some of that thought and then have taken that and have maybe, you know, digested it into more of a religious form. And you end up with little pictures for kids to help them learn how to read in the early readers. But essentially, picture storytelling in America is very influenced by our Puritan roots in New England, which is where a lot of the printing presses are or were. And that's where the taste making for children's literature came from. And comic books were kind of a bit of a rebellion against that. But when you think about the fact that the overall culture still has the inertia of the American heritage of Puritanism, the idea that picture storytelling is for kids. And once you become an adult, I put away childish things. And okay, here's one adult cartoon for you that we'll tolerate, or two of them at most. And like I said, there's a very different approach to image-based storytelling that does not exist in other cultures that we have. That's part of our DNA.
I really want to. I have something that segues perfectly into that. So
I actually wanted to push back on that a little bit because we used to have a more diverse comic book industry, and when we did, comic book consumers looked a lot like manga consumers. They were a lot more diverse, different ages, different genders, and all of that. So the fact that the superhero genre fits a certain demographic slice is almost like it was a genre designed for one demographic slice.
So
one of the things, one point to that too on Larry's point is you even get back to the 70s and 80s, Marvel was releasing adults only black and white Conan books. You know, not through the regular, I mean, it was all in the comics newsstand, but they were in Fantasy Mags. And and that's one thing that went the way of the dodo in the 80s. That's okay. There was a lot of genre constriction that happened in the 80s, which we've talked about before.
That is correct. However, it does not negate the point that comics were an act of rebellion against the treason of images, essentially the prejudice against image-based storytelling. The librarians in New York banded together to be like, how do we fight comics? That used to be
and Chicago too. Don't forget those ladies.
Here's the weird thing though, is that
before we go too far, Marm had a point he really wanted to make.
So I had two things that kind of would segue into that. So I think Scott McCloud is talking about that issue from the perspective of a comic nerd. Like the idea that he is fighting throughout all of understanding comics is bam, wham, zoom, comics are for kids. That's the idea he hates and he wants to break, essentially. Yeah. I've seen it in book illustration, novel illustration. So I remember I picked up a Charles Dickens book, and then at the intro, the editors said, "We believe that illustrations damage the process of reading by corrupting your imagination. So we have elected to leave out any illustrations except for a few historical pictures in the middle of the book. And my immediate thought is Charles Dickens hired illustrators and worked with them to make the illustrations fit with his book. He wrote books inspired by illustrations. So that's just like a nice little nugget of how the traditional publishing of anti-illustration bias in publishing industry.
Yeah.
I see the bias that Twitless sees, and I remember no graphic novels in the library. The explosion of the teenage graphic novel section is, I don't know, maybe like past since like the 2000s. I've started noticing that popping up at least in my local library, for example.
So there's
I might be lucky because we had trades in our library back in the 90s. So like that's where I first read Batman Year One, and actually this little where'd it go? Where'd it go? Oh man, I can't find it. I've got a copy of the it's a trade paperback like this size of the issue miniseries. The saga of Batman that was it was like the definitive story of Batman's origins from the pre-crisis, like Bronze Age Batman. And here it is. This one I bought at a Gary Library sale. You can actually, if you look right close, you can see there where they cut the UPC out of it because he used it back then. And this has been read to heck, but this thing was published in like 1986 or whatever, and it was still there when I was a kid. And I bought it up in 1982, and I snatched it up when it went on book sale because I didn't want it to disappear. So, but I had these, and like I said, Batman Year One, a couple of them here in Gering, Nebraska, of all things.
You're very lucky. The point is that when people say, "Oh, manga's kicking our butts," and it's like, okay, there is some cultural inertia that the West has to deal with that. I don't know enough about Eastern culture to like go as far back to talk about like their approaches, but I know that the end result is very different because their visual storytelling is all over the place. They also don't have, and this is something I do want to comment on, especially if we're going to bring in the spiritual aspect of it, because not every aspect of Puritanism gets criticized a lot. But I will say one aspect of Puritanism that I have a hard time criticizing is the moral aspect, or at least some of the desire to be moral. And so the hard lines that separate cartooning and what is appropriate for a cartoon, the rules that we have, again, all go back to that. The fact that, you can't have a character with a gun, and we don't want the violence. We don't want to show the sex. We don't want to see any of that in the children's cartoon. We don't want our 8-year-olds, seeing like, women in ridiculous bikinis with, oversized breasts and or like nude scenes. And I'm like, and manga and anime both they don't share that Puritan Christian outlook. And so, like I said, you can pick up a kid's manga like Dragon Ball, for heaven's sake, and it's like, here's Goku like pulling down Bulma's drawers and being like, what's down there? And like, that's just not a scene you would see in a children's appropriate piece here. So like, that is, some people would consider that an edge that Japan has, but that's an edge that compromising that for us would also mean compromising values that I'm not sure I'm okay with. So.
Yeah, well, because it's weird. They do have a different type of Puritanism there. Again, it's all cultural, because there's things that would seem out of place to us from this perspective, but then there's stuff that we'd be fine with that they would cut out because they would think it's not appropriate for kids. And one of the reasons why like nudity is not so much of a problem is because they still have the culture of like the public bathhouse and things like that. So there's like a lot of tipping points where it seems outrageous, but from their perspective, that is okay for a kid. But then there's things like I'm trying to think of some of the ones. There's a lot of stuff that they just cut out altogether, even at an adult. Like on the adult level, hentai is not allowed to have nipples. Like period, like men or women, they just kind of like blur.
That's not accurate. There's plenty of hentai that has nipples. Like
if
that might be
not off the shelf. If you get it off the shelf, they blur it out. Now there are ways of getting it without them blurring it out, but like there is still a Puritanism that is there. It's just a completely different kind.
The urethra has to be blacked out.
Jesus.
Not the whole genitals, just the urethra.
Okay, when they reanimated Dragon Ball, I remember there was a big deal.
Let's pause it on the hentai discussion, please.
This isn't hentai. This is not hentai. Okay, when they reanimated Dragon Ball, they had to take. Okay, I'm still gonna bother you though. When they reanimated Dragon Ball, they had to take out Goku's little baby penis in the new versions.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he's naked as a baby.
That's what I'm talking about. There's some of that I agree with Metal, but some of it is there's just some degeneracy in. I like manga a lot, but there's some comfort level with degeneracy.
We all know
that the culture
we
has.
have way higher standards of censorship than they do. Let's not forget though that in some ways more recently, a lot of our what's the word we're using here? Puritanism has to just being plain political.
I mean, the SJWs are
because something funny happened in the chat.
Who keeps pulling up the C.S. Lewis quotes?
That's me. There's just one of them for every occasion.
Okay. It's the fact that you pulling up multiple ones this stream is funny.
I also like the fact it's a Chesterton reference too.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention Lewis in this whole conversation about childishness in comics, because it was he that specifically said, when I became a man, I gave up childish things like worrying whether or not I was childish.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an appropriate mascot for this part of the conversation.
C.S. Lewis is the patron saint of any religious person who wants to talk about comic books without feeling embarrassed about it. Thank you, C.S. Lewis, for giving us our memeable quote to make us feel okay that we're talking about comic books.
But
I also love this particular comment, because I was going to mention with Puritans, one of my favorite things about Puritans is how much they valued marital relations. So,
well,
way to go, guys.
But the SJW ethos is the new Puritanism, because Puritanism is all about regulation. And
it's a weird paradox, because it's Puritanism of thought, but it's inverted morality,
right?
Which means that everything that you were supposed to be ashamed of, you're supposed to now proudly display, which means literally being naked on parade, which is what they cheer for. But you're supposed to be ashamed to have to think that marriage would be between a man and a woman. You should be ashamed to utter that out loud. And so, it's not that shame culture doesn't exist, but it's been completely it's polarly inverted. The poles have been completely reversed, so that the things that you should be ashamed of are the things that,
But here's where that gets really weird, because the comic book industry has been trying to put this in there in spades as of late, and it's only killing them further.
Well, and I think,
so who exactly is the audience that's being failed here?
I think saying it's killing them is a little overbroad, because they keep making money, but they're not making the money they were making. But it doesn't matter, because as long as they're producing those IPs for their, the Disney daddies, then who cares, right? So there's a sort of a perverse incentive with all of that. And people may. So I think that's an aspect too, which comes back to a little bit. I'm just going to throw this in here. Part of my issue with the take on escapism being the point of any form of literature is that the purpose of art is to reflect a society back on itself, right? It's to be that mirror, but it's also to be the aspiration, right? So I don't.
You're literally. I figured it out. You're a neoclassicist. You literally just said the mirror and the lamp, like word for word.
Well, hold up. You didn't know that already, Twitless? You hadn't figured that out already?
I mean, when he said it in so many words. That's
fine.
Always focus.
I'll take it.
On mythological subject matter and extremism.
Right. All right. Well, okay. This explains a lot, because Reese is a neoclassicist. I'm probably. Let me think. I think I am more in the romantic camp, which is probably why I push back against the idea that no, I actually don't think literature should be the reflection. I'm more in the escapist camp. But
even with that, what are you? I mean, the thing is, even looking at it from a romantic perspective, what are you escaping to? Right? The point of the escape is to you're looking at the way it ought to be. So it still has that aspirational aspect about what are we gearing our minds for? We're gearing them for
I want to speak to the escapism.
The sublime.
So speaking to the escapism, okay. It seems to me that earlier we were talking about like our SJWs. We're kind of having things hop all over the place, but they're kind of related. So earlier we were talking about our SJWs Puritans. Again, I'm just going to keep quote mining Lewis here, but I think Lewis has this idea that there's a certain kind of national character that a people has. So for him, it's like King Arthur is the English character symbolized, and to America, the cowboy is the American character symbolized, and the samurai is the Japanese character symbolized, right? So I think that there's a American way that people get screwed up or that people do well. So the reason that SJWs are like Puritans is that American SJWs are acting out American characteristics within their own worldview. So they act out a Puritan, they have a Puritan American background that they hate, but they can't get away from it entirely. And so they retain those characters.
And that's the point I've been making about the industry, because it explains how I think some of these paradoxes, right? It's obvious that we don't live in Puritan times. I'm not saying that, we're all Puritans. What I'm saying is that the legacy of Puritan thought, thinking, ethic, and its impact on publishing in particular, and the approach to image-based storytelling, to be even more specific, partially explains the situation of the comic book industry and why it looks different than what Japan came up with without the same set of, the same legacy. Yeah.
A good Puritan question is, why are you reading these comic books when you could be reading your Bible? Right. And then that's kind of like every like kid in a red state household is going to wrestle with that at some point. What is the difference between me liking my Sonky the Hedgehogs and me idolizing my Sonky the Hedgehog's cartoons, right? So, to the point of escapism, I think.
All right, Marm, I have to interrupt you. If you're gonna bastardize Sonic, why don't you go for Sanic and not Sonky? What is Sonky? We already have a
Sanic is famous enough that he is now his own thing. Sanic is Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog isn't. He is philosophically distinct from Sonic the Hedgehog.
Platonically,
there's even Sanic.
I got to agree with Marm. Sanic is his own platonic type. He's a separate case.
Sanic was featured in the Sonic the Hedgehog movie as a separate character.
It's derivative, but it is not in fact. But it is in fact separate.
Movie Gandalf isn't book Gandalf. It's just madness. All right, I was building up to a beautiful rainbow Christmas present bow tie on that, and then we went everywhere. All right, the beautiful Christmas rainbow I was building up to was did I lose it? No, okay, escapism. All right, escapism is bad if escapism is a kind of perpetual, naive repetition of the same basic stupid point over and over and over again. Right. Escapism is a value if you are escaping into a world where a certain set of rules exist so that you can analyze those rules. So when a nerd gets iseki'd into a fantasy universe and he learns to become a man, the escape is placing the character in a scenario where he learns manly characteristics. I would argue that a lot of Western art struggles with the idea of what a man is. Like Breaking Bad is about a tough guy who's evil. Sopranos are about tough guys who are criminals, right? Like, what is the tough good? What does the tough good man look like? So, if an isekai is about growing into manhood, then the escapism is serving a higher moral purpose. If the escapism is I'm a loser and I'm going to get isekai'd where I have a harem and I have magical superpowers, it's a fantasy fulfillment without any substance to it.
And that's okay. So again, we're getting into the some assumptions of crap. First off, I have to say that chat is just launching off and having a Sonic debate about the virtues of Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic Adventure 2. I think Captain Cummings played Sonic 1 and 2 for the Genesis and then quit before the best entry in the entire series. Fight me. Sonic 3 and Knuckles for life.
Well, actually, the best entry is Sonic Advanced 2 for the Game Boy Advance.
No,
those are really underrated.
I will fight you to the death on that. Sonic 3 or bust. Does not get better. Does not get better than Sonic 3. Just... Sonic Advance is okay. Sonic Advance is okay.
Yes,
but...
yes, that's okay.
Yes, but don't talk about it. We don't talk about what happens in the bathroom.
But we're getting into some assumptions about the function of art, and there's a whole, the whole of literary criticism, I think, revolves around some of this, which is, and to be honest, it is germane to the concept of social justice in art, right? Because you get some of the artists like the neoclassicists, you get some of the artists like the realists, people who see art as needing to do something. You know, if the art doesn't serve a function in society, if it doesn't have this sort of utilitarian or teleological aspect to it, then it shouldn't exist. And then you get the people who believe in art for art's sake, and the fact that, you know, nature is art, and so on, and, you know, it just exists, you know, because God made it so.
The thing is, if it just exists, that also means it provides a function, because things that simply exist have a tailless to them.
I'm not talking about like ontologically. I'm talking about there are people who feel like if it does not have a direct, easily explained teleological function in your day-to-day Puritan understanding of life, then it's not worth your time. You might as well read your Bible, which is the point that Marm was making.
Yeah.
The point is the fact that SJWs actually believe this. This is a bit of common ground. Because social justice warriors in the no escapism idea will look at Spider-Man and go, if Spider-Man is not serving to fight racism, what good is he? If you're not fighting racism, you're contributing to the problem. And so there's actually a bit of awkward common ground from people who think that every piece of art needs to either preach the gospel, be a sermon. Exactly. And that's the common ground, because there are people on the religious, I'm not even going to call it the right.
It's just a different type of sermon.
Yeah, they're religious sides to it's either a social justice sermon or religious sermon, and that's where I have to take I don't ascribe to that myself, and I think that people like C.S. Lewis at times didn't either. There are parts of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that are very deeply allegorical, and there are parts of it that's just, I was having fun, yo.
Well, and I mean, I think that like that the if there's a middle ground position in that, it's just that I think that art will have an analog function if it's true, right? It will reflect these things. I don't necessarily think you have to make it reflect these things, right? Like a story that is a story that speaks to truth, it's going to reflect your life, whether it's trying to or not. It's going to, because it speaks to truth, right? So in the same way that, like, let me think of a good example here. Okay, so in Rogue One, right? Rogue One ends with a massive tragedy, right? So, spoiler alert for a 10-year-old movie out there, people.
Was it 10
right?
Where you knew the ending before you went into the movie.
Yeah, you knew the ending before you went into the movie, but also you don't know the extent of it. Like, and I actually think there may have been some mistakes with how the ending plays out, but you know it's going to be horrible, and it ends with this super sad, tragic ending, but it fits with, you know, the thing where everybody dies. That's the spoiler, guys. So if one person would have survived, okay, you could buy that. If everybody survives, you're like, there is no way that happened. That doesn't ring. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem true. There's no possible way. It extends the suspension of disbelief in a world with space wizards. I can't believe this. You know, that would be that kind of a situation. And I think that, but it still speaks to the fact that life, like war is hell, war is tragic. We have an understanding of this, so it speaks to a truth in there. Now, I don't necessarily think that the screenwriters were trying to tell a story that's going to speak to our experience. They're just trying to tell a realistic war story where we already kind of know the outcome, right? And how that shakes out. And I think that they accomplished that in that. But it doesn't have to smack you upside the head. It rings because there's an analog function when you're telling the truth about a thing. And I think that so when it comes to, you're telling a story, I don't think you have to try. When I say that I think that art holds a mirror, the whole mirror and the lamp thing, right? I think those things are true, not because you're trying it. It's just because you're telling the truth, right? It's just you as an artist, you're just telling the truth. You're putting your experience and the experience of people around you on there as honest as you can, warts and all, and it's going to tell the truth. I think it's going to have a function on it.
So to a beautiful quote that isn't C.S. Lewis. I think Andrew Clavin had a novel where one of the characters says, the imagination is an organ of perception like the eye. So the imagination works by interpreting things in the world and in life, and then creating out of that information. And actually, Twitless, I think Andrew Clavin is a romantic. So some of his like nonfiction writing on the romantic poets might segue into some of the stuff you might be interested in.
I just read The Truth and the Beauty like 2 weeks ago. Oh man, that's so good. So and Clavin's actually talked about how his romanticist perspective is at odds with some Burkean conservatives. If art peaked with the Renaissance, then the function of art is to make beautiful sculptures of biblical figures, or maybe the founding fathers. And I have a love of that field of art, but I kind of think that the hippie experimental, let's just make art because they make art because of that. The hippie worldview results in creating a lot of interesting art.
I can appreciate both. I can even, I appreciate surrealism, I appreciate things that challenge my mind and push against things, I assume.
Yeah, I appreciate surrealism, but like at the same time, Jackson Pollock is crap. Let's just.
All right, I'm gonna put. Okay, here we go, Matt. So I think Jackson Pollock is painting beautiful paintings without skill. Right. So here's the question: is it the skill element or is it the beauty element? Is a skilled painter painting an ugly, disgusting image with the most incredible, talented skill imaginable? Is that not art because it lacks beauty, or is it art because it has great skill?
We have circled.
See, the thing is.
We've circled back to the philosophy of art.
Yeah,
we have definitely. So Jackson Pollock,
I like a good ugly art.
Jackson Pollock makes ugly pictures without skill, so it's totally off the charts of what you're saying.
Is the night sky ugly?
I have to challenge you on that. By what rubric are you making that?
The fact that you can easily mistake a Jackson Pollock painting for the concrete underneath an awning where the pigeons go to nest.
What if I think that the concrete under the awning where the pigeons go to nest are beautiful because it's a dimension of God's beautiful world?
Dude, I was born in Wyoming. I have the birthright to trash Jackson Pollock. He disgraces our state.
All right.
Just like Liz Cheney.
I call myself a postmodernist because I see the. Yeah. All right, I call myself this because I've never seen anybody describe it. Right. So I see ugly.
I have.
Okay. I see the ugliness that people see in modern, what's called modern and postmodern art, right? Every layman you ever talk to knows there's something ugly or bad about modern or postmodern art, even if they don't know like what the difference between those two things are, or they may not even be able to name a modern or postmodern artist. They just know ugly crap when they see it.
You mean
right?
that big public art display in Boston?
Exactly. And we keep getting new examples of this. So the art world feels completely bankrupt of making beautiful things, right? But at the same time, I see in the modern and postmodern movement I see ideas that are more sophisticated than just that's ugly. We don't need to pay attention to it. You could kind of dismiss it by saying, well, they just have a clique and that's what they like, so they make what they like, even if it's crap and it's all like one of my favorite theories is maybe it's all just like a giant money laundering scheme for the billionaires, right? But
so I've actually heard a description of that. Have you heard the term meta-modernism, which is where you take a step back and you look at both modernism and postmodernism for the like intricate parts of them, almost mechanically and not like as a movement?
Describe it a little bit more, because I've never heard.
Yeah, so it's very very loose term. Some people have thrown it around. But it is kind of a postmodernism look in a way, and personally, I don't even believe in postmodernism. I think it's literally just another phase of modernism because it just takes it to its natural extent. But basically, it's stepping backwards and looking at modernism and postmodernism. Like the term, you can't see the forest for the trees. So you're actually looking at like the whole picture of the movements mechanically. Right. And looking at the strengths of the movement, what they actually do well when it comes to being a critical lens, and then trying to kind of scrape that part out of it while acknowledging the parts it doesn't do well, almost artistically. Like it's a function of the system. It's there.
Let me try to guess if I know what this means. So, for example, you could look at a modern artist and say, well, I don't like minimalism, but at least this guy knows how to organize shapes in a beautiful way. So I can learn from, the principles of design in some of this modern art. Or I could learn from, I don't know, in postmodern art, maybe I could learn from the idea of bringing humor into art.
Duchamp's fountain.
Yeah, that's a joke. Yeah, it's a great joke. It's a joke at the expense of modern art, right? Like the joke is, well, I didn't get it until I started looking at other modern artists of his era and realized, oh, the joke is that the other artists who were alive while he was alive were making these big, simple looking sculptures. So he's just saying all this stuff looks like a bunch of urinals to me.
Before this goes any further, I need to pop a few people's bubbles here by pointing out that officially the era we are supposed to be in right now is in fact not the postmodern era, but is referred to as the postmodern era.
Yeah. Okay. So what defines it? What defines it as distinct from the postmodern era?
I have given up understanding it.
So are we talking from the social science? Are we talking from the social science perspective?
We are in the era of deviant art.
Okay. So here's the thing. Historians tend to be, I think, the ones who comment on some of those things. I think that you only know certain types of periods after they've happened. So yeah. I think that the people who will be able to adequately describe what happened after postmodernism will be the people who have the fortune of the benefit of hindsight with like 30 years, who can be able to go, okay, there's a clear delineation between this movement and this movement here. Here's the things that we can label it as, and so on. I would also say, and here's something that I also think that's very important to consider when it comes to the arts as a whole. I think that historians may struggle to describe art after, I'm guessing 2000 something, because it's
of 9/11.
Yeah, well, it's 9/11, right? No, just the exponential explosion of content. Like when you think about like the who you described as these are the representative artists of a generation, you end up in like in previous periods, it's like here it's the wealthy white men who lived in Britain at the time for some of these periods, and it was a small cadre of people, and then maybe there was like, oh, here's a sub movement, and here's 4 other guys, and then when you hit modernity and then post-modernity, and then specifically with the digital revolution, there's like 100 million creators. Try to like put a box that's big enough to fit 100 million creators, and that's with AI. That's probably probably be able to add a couple other zeros to the end of that.
Well, and heck, I mean that's the way I felt about even postmodern.
I'm just saying that like the explosion makes it, I think, much more difficult. Whereas in earlier periods, it's like here's like the half dozen people that defined the art of the time, and it's
Chris Chan is a more famous artist than whoever made the banana duct tape sculpture. Nobody knows the name of the guy who made the banana duct tape. They only know that there's like a banana duct tape thing out there somewhere.
So also in a social science context, postmodernism is used to describe the response to the Nazism. Nazism was viewed as the modernism going off the rails, an inhuman horror show, mechanizing death on a massive scale. Postmodernism's response was to use narratives to deconstruct institutions of power. Now, at the end of postmodernism, we're at a place where narratives are the institutions of power. So if we're entering into postmodernism, we need to get into a post-narrative period of society.
Unless it's a restoration, right? Like you can progress forward, or you can progress by turning around and going back the way you came, right? Like I think what I would perceive as, I think like the internet changed the structure of power to the point where now anybody can talk and anybody can build an audience. Yep. So the potential to bring a narrative into the world is now you're no longer gate-kept by like a few small publishing.
Not necessarily, but it will be interesting to see who the people who write the textbooks, because within 100 years or so, the only records that will remain will be whoever's talking. The preserved records that get taught in school, because when you think about how much culture is not talked about, for example, in the Victorian period, again, it gets boiled down to the half dozen people that basically academics want to talk about.
Yeah, y'all friends of Oscar Wilde. No, I mean, think about it. Like one of the most enduring Victorian writers is Bram Stoker, right? Yeah. And I was stunned when I found out that not only was he pals with Oscar Wilde, but that they had courted the same girl, which I didn't realize Oscar was bi until then, and that Stoker won. And like that was a rift between them. Like they stopped communicating after that because it apparently got ugly.
That's interesting.
I was like,
Rose before hose hadn't been invented yet.
Oh yeah. They hadn't invented the bro code. I will say Dracula 2 by Brahms. It's his grandnephew,
great grandson, or great nephew or something.
His nephew, his great grandnephew or something, and he lived in the same state as me. And he was like, I was so excited because he wrote Dracula 2, and then I read the synopsis for it. It was utter revisionist garbage, and it was like, dude, like, why?
You have the last name Stoker?
Yeah, it's like you could have done anything with this, and you did the exact bargain basement. Oh, well, actually, Dracula's the good guy. Oh gosh.
Oh, this is so.
Didn't he do that though, based on notes that Brahms left?
No, he just did something stupid.
We have a Jackson Pollock spider just to mock me.
That's I like that. That's the best one you've ever done. That's genius.
Well, it's great because I can still tell what it is by looking at it too.
And the thing is, what if Dracula was the good guy is derivative of like the first 12 or 13 stories to do that sort of a bit.
That's what I'm saying. Like it was like you have the chance of a lifetime to attach the name Stoker to a Dracula project. Everyone's going to show up for it. And like you could do something really interesting with it. And you do the Dracula. You think that the interesting thing to do is Dracula's the good guy and all the people who killed him are actually evil. And it was just like, it's stupid.
I
daring today, aren't we?
Yeah, daring today, aren't we?
So the most interesting thing would be for Dracula to show him and be like, "Listen, you don't know about the Muslims. Let me tell you about the Muslims. You think I'm bad? Wait till I tell you about the invaders."
He lived with them.
I love a good
spoke it perfectly.
A good trope subversion as much as the next guy. But it does seem like the trend now is to take every major super evil villain you've ever had and try to humanize them down into some spin.
So there is some literary idea about you need to queerify the monster, especially if the monster's a clown.
Oh yeah, that's a whole. I don't even want to talk about that.
If you wanted to do Dracula 2, what you needed to do is you needed to just do like a follow-up. And like, Dracula had some spawn or something, and it was like, or here's another vampire to fight, which they kind of did, but like they brought Dracula back, and now he's the good guy, and it's just like this is fan fiction. It was Dacre is his name, Dacre Stroker, and it was like you're literally writing like low rent fan fiction that I could get on the internet.
Well, plus it's already been done. I mean, isn't that what Hellsing is all about?
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, Dracula is great. It's a fantastic piece of fiction. It's one of the. It's a piece of fiction that is like, I would even call it like seminal. Catholic or Christian horror to an extent.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely Catholic. And actually, that's one of the really interesting aspects about it too, is that Stoker himself was Protestant and his wife was Catholic. So part of the aspect of it is that's like his marriage, his relationship, the doctrinal conversation between he and his wife are informative of the piece. So it's definitely a Catholic work, and it is. Well, I would go so far as to say it's one of the best English language novels ever, because one of the things, and not just in terms of the way the story lays out, but one of the things that Stoker did, it's an epistolatory novel, so it's all letters, some journal entries, some newspaper articles.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd overreach and say it's one of the best. I would say it's. Let me
make my case on it, right? Because it's not that the plotting and the story and the dialogue are the best, right? But one of the things that Stoker does is with his word choice, he is able to explain and describe like Dracula is in between the words of every page, right? Like there's this like where he's able to like use the language evocatively in a way that like in the back of your mind as you're visualizing this thing, you can see shadows flitting, and in those shadows it's Dracula. So there's a terror that is a part of like just pervasive on the thing.
Of interest, wasn't he a Protestant though? So he has Catholic artistic elements, right? Mm-hmm. He's consciously drawing from another tradition to evoke a feeling. Yeah.
Yep. I think he might be overreaching a tad. I like Dracula. Man. I like Dracula, and I think it may be one of the best pieces of Christian fiction in a sense, if we think about it from a certain perspective. But if you want like blow your mind epistolatory novel, you need to read Charles de Laclos' Dangerous Liaisons, Liaisons Dangereuses or whatever, because that is like it makes I don't know, it's pure genius. Epistolary novels are good.
Say it, so I definitely won't remember it.
Dangerous Liaisons. They've made some famous they've made some well-known films adaptations and such about it, but the novel itself is epistolatory, and it's characters who are lying to each other and have no reason to tell the truth and manipulating everybody, writing letters to each other. So you get just so many.
I've seen the version with John Malkovich.
But you gotta read the nothing overcomes reading the text, because when you read these people's letters to each other, the layers of subtext create just layers of narrative, and it's like I said, it's just utterly brilliant. And I think he didn't write much; he just wrote this like one brilliant piece of fiction. He was like a one-hit wonder. Anyway, great piece.
So getting back to how 9/11 ruined comics.
So one of the that's great. But
we
so
need to save that as a
Abigail
says,
says
deleted for a show.
First of all, Abigail says that is the most French name I've ever heard.
Well, that's true because he was French.
And oh no, look what you've done. So
Joel Osteen is the best Christian horror author.
And Brian says, "Hey, Brian." How's it going, man?
Mm.
I need to read your issue 9. I haven't yet because I've been busy, but I need to do it. Anyway, who's the panel? This panel is everybody up here. It's you got the metal. Hey, our names aren't on here anymore. How did that happen?
It pops up sometimes when you don't have the
There we go.
a comment up. They disappear when you bring a comment on stream.
Oh, is that how it works?
Because we need to focus on the commentator at that point.
Well, I guess that's sense. So we just put this up there, which is totally not about me. Okay. So, back to how, well, not just how 9/11 were in comment, back to the concept of commentary. Let's go see if we can bring this full circle.
I think we've settled nothing.
No, not at all. Not at all.
What even was the original topic? It was about
why no one talks about comics.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we went into the history of the art
rant talking about art critique and its place in society and not about comics.
And then Dracula, Sonic. It's been.
There's got to be a way we can pull this together.
Well, I mean, we weren't talking about comics, so that's the topic.
Yeah.
The one ring of my thesis, and to a lesser extent Twitless's thesis, is authenticity. Comics are being written by people in a way that's trying to be authentic to themselves, but it's not authentic to their audience. It's being inauthentically sold to their audience, and it's leading to nobody wanting to authentically engage with the story because it's all a bunch of nonsense.
Well,
I like just saying 9/11.
There's a big problem where everybody is like hung up on specifically the American superhero mainstream, which had been the mainstream of American comics for a long time. But there's like people who are hung up with that idea. There are plenty of people talking about comics. Just nobody cares about that anymore. Like even America, like I have conversations with random people about webtoons and stuff like that. Like people who otherwise don't even converse about comics. I'll talk about like there's this like rom-com webtoon they're reading that week. There are plenty of people talking about comics.
Well, and even if you look at like you'll get in-depth conversations about superhero comics that are indie comics, right? Like people talking about Common America, people talking about Punchline, people talking about Rags. You know, not just because Brian's in the chat, but it's true. And so you get that people. So there are indie superhero books that are generating those same kind of online conversations, talking about plot, talking about, you know, character development, talking about the nefarious plans that are being outlaid within the stories and that kind of thing. But I do think that there is a certain, I think that Larry's position that there's a certain lack of vigor within the online fan community to discuss the nature of the individual attributes of those superhero comics. But I do think people are talking about superhero comics, just not the DC and Marvel variety.
I want to talk a bit about so now we're getting into the commentariat side as opposed to the art philosophy of art side. Okay, so the commentariat side. I wish Matt C was here because Matt C kind of has an interesting.
Matt?
So Matt. So let me
I don't have enough room for Matt.
Let me act out. I'm going to be strawman Matt C today. So strawman Matt C has kind of taken the interesting position that they're actually comics drama is good actually because it's a business and this business functions based on the emotional reaction to the material. So responding to SJW cringe is now a cottage industry on YouTube. And there are people who are utterly uninterested in comics as a medium who love responding to SJW cringe, and they all get like 300,000 views a video. That seems to be where it taps out on. So like Matt C is kind of interested in this as like from a businessman perspective. How could you do that? Could you make the sweet super chat donations dunking on whatever the latest comics drama is, right?
Oh God, no! I can't even get people to read my comic.
All right. So, my view of it is, I feel like the internet is just. There's this great meme where it's like Wojak. He says they don't know. I'm a ultra micro niche.
Yeah. Everyone's just dancing at the party.
Yeah. So, I think I see different subgenres or I guess subcultures of YouTube content. There are nerds who will do a 4-hour analysis video on every single panel of this cartoon or that comic, and sometimes it'll be something goofy like Sonichu or Tails Gets Trolled. It'll be the humor. The humor is almost, I'm spending hours and hours and hours analyzing something that most people would just assume is crap by taking a cursory glance at it, right? And then there's going to be like, you know, the video essay culture, you know, 8 hours analyzing every single aspect of the Pokemon franchise, right? So there's
the one that I'm in, the power scaling community, where people look at how powerful characters from comics and other media are.
All right, so yeah, discussion, in-depth discussion of comics and media exists. Outraged, look at these goofy personalities and let's make fun of their Twitter. That subculture exists. It's just sort of like people don't notice. If you're in one subculture, you may not notice the other subculture because that's not what the algorithm is feeding you, because the algorithm knows what you like to watch. If you like the 8-hour videos, you probably don't like the cringe, and if you like the cringe, you probably don't like the 8-hour analysis.
So I'm going to try to walk in with a somewhat nuanced take here, because I think that there are people who clearly are strong adherents to the criticism channels, and then there are people who go, "That's just grifting. I'm tired of that. You're just whining and such."
Well,
I think both. I think.
But the thing is, one note, and I'm not taking away from your point, but I have to say, I get so irritated with people that misuse the word grifting. Right?
I know. I hate that word.
Grifting is a very specific kind of con where you're promised a product that you don't get.
I know. So I know.
And only a few people do.
I know you do. I know you do. Well, and I'm one of them. I've been promising an update.
Well, I
haven't gotten it yet, but nobody's pays for my stuff, so that's a different. But if you get what you're paying for, then it's not a grift.
Or the only way it can be a grift is to like mind read the motives of somebody, and that gets into motivism. And I'm not saying it's impossible to judge motives, but you have to be very careful about it, because when you say I know why you're doing this, you're making a big old assumption. And oftentimes it's an arrogant kind of an assumption to be like, Reese, I know why you did that. That's basically me saying I can read your mind. And it's like, no, you can't. Shut the hell up. You can't read you can barely read your own mind. No.
Well, I mean, I did release a manifesto when I did it, so there's that.
So the point is that people will say it's all grifting. So that's why I used the word. And so the point is I think that both sides there have a point. And what I would like to do is to describe a life cycle as opposed to X should exist and Y shouldn't exist. I believe that it is a very natural part of an indie creator's, or many indie creators' life cycle, to begin with critique and seeking out critique of stuff that they go, that's crap. I know that I think many of us can say that we found, we go, what's going on with this show? It's terrible. And we start Googling, like, who are the other people who think this? And then we go, oh, I found a whole cadre, a community perhaps, who think the same way as me. And then from that energy sometimes comes the next stage in that life cycle. You know what? We all say this is terrible. I'm going to do my own thing. And so I think it's necessary to understand that some of these hate review channels, I think, do serve an important role in the pipeline. If those channels cease to exist, then where do the people go when they're beginning their journey of, you know what, this is crap. I need to find other people who think it's crap too. So I think those channels still should exist. But I also think that it's also a natural part of the life cycle to eventually get tired of it and go, okay, I've heard this a million times. Yes, I know Star Wars is terrible. I don't need to hear it the millionth and 1th time. I'm good.
I think that comes back to the title of the show, right? Is it's not enough to just point out what's bad with a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to point out why it's bad, or you didn't care for it, and what is good, right? It's not enough to sit there and wallow in, I'm really unhappy with X, and not say, oh, hey, by the way, I have discovered Y, and if you agree with me about X, you may love Y. And you should read Forces of Good and Evil. because it's 700 pages of teen comedy drama in a superhero universe. It's great stuff. And I don't just say that because it's mine.
Some of that may be
Cartucus and I are coming for you, by the way. We'll hit 700 the next 3 years.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping by then we'll really have gone up there. Mrs. H
right.
is making.
I'm just saying we're coming for it. We're at 500.
Are we getting a plethora of pickles this time?
Jeez.
I don't know. Or she's laughing. I don't know. I don't know what the story is.
We got the two eyes and then the tee-hee. It's the same.
That's true.
Time.
That's usually what tells us we've got pickles waiting for us somewhere along the road.
Here we go.
So maybe using Mrs. H as an illustration of this, I think a healthy community looks like lots of fan art, lots of fan fiction, lots of memes, right? That's when you can tell it's not let's hate on X, it's let's love Y. I really resonate with Twitless's framing. So like my wording of it would be, once you have your settled opinions, you don't need to reconfirm your settled opinions. But the fact that you've settled your opinions doesn't mean that there aren't lots of other people who are still trying to figure out their opinions, right? Yeah. So I love the movie Ratatouille because like the whole point of the movie Ratatouille is that Ego, the food critic, is like an art critic who has grown too full of himself. He sees himself as the kingmaker who can destroy a restaurant chef with a stroke of his pen, right? And so what he learns is the beauty of the rat's beautiful cooking moves him, and he falls in love with this beautiful art, and so he becomes the defender of whatever the rat's name, Remy the Rat, right? So I think a humble art critic's job basically is to identify good art and alert people, hey, this good art exists, and perhaps wittingly, but I do think a dimension of what an art critic is supposed to do is to sort of kind of like using his wit, say, here's what didn't work, and the better you write, the more beautifully you're able to express why the dumb art is dumb.
Captain Cummings didn't like Ratatouille, so you're gonna have to fight him on that one. I want to point out something very important that applies directly to comics, which is people in comics have forgotten how nasty and critical the letters pages, at least when they were written by genuine people, because sometimes the editors would write their own letters, and that's something. That's a whole thing. But when they were genuine letters, and we know that many of them were. They would put these creators on blast, and the editors would print it, or at least print some of them, and they would say the most, critical things about, this guy doesn't know how to draw, this person doesn't know how to write, you made all these mistakes. So like the idea that I think it's interesting when comics stopped publishing letters, which is what I know it's post Image, because Image still published letters.
Well, it was in the early aughts when they stopped publishing letters, and it started because I can't remember if it happened at Marvel, but at DC they'd been purchased by Time Warner purchased by AOL. So for a while the letters page was just reprinting from the AOL
the message
DC comic sub community on AOL. And so they were just printing, and like if you wanted to get it published, chances are you had to contact them. And they had this whole thing where they'd have open hours, and then the creators were expected to show up at certain message boards at certain times and communicate with the people like live. And like that got hairy for a while because a lot of writers are they ain't people persons,
Exactly.
So they intentionally, that was a real harsh thing. So and so I think that was a factor with that whole deal. But it was around that time that they kind of stopped doing letters, and then
Cummings says it was around. Cummings said that there were some letters at least being published into 2012.
And they had stopped and started again, right? And that was a push. And I think that they saw some of the decrease in those and kind of tried letter columns again to try to get the fans to come in, and they just weren't. I don't think they ever were able to come back from that.
So the point I want to make here is the fact that comics have always had a very healthy debate regarding the quality of the work, and it could get very personal, at least from the fans who were writing. So this idea of like, oh, you know, people are mean on Twitter, and it's like, have you read a letters page? Like it may not be, it may not have had as much profanity in it, and some of it may have not been as, you know, vulgar. But I mean, people were plenty mean in letters pages, and they would put the works on blast. They would say this is shallow writing, this is terrible writing. Some of them would list every mistake that was made. So
there's a reason why the Marvel No Prize was for you to not just point out the mistake, but to explain how it is that it actually wasn't a mistake.
So the point is that the idea of like hate watching and hate reading, I'm like, this goes back to comics, like
back in the 60s,
right?
That's interesting because, you know, we end up with all this debate, like you were talking about She-Hulk, you know, every time something comes out, there's a million people who love it and a million people who hate it, right? And I'm sure you've noticed it's the easiest thing in the world for a producer of an IP, when it doesn't succeed or when lots of people hate it, to immediately claim that everyone who dislikes it is either a hater or some kind of bigot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible, here we see basically gatekeepers trying to control the narrative of what people actually think about it, and push aside anyone who dislikes something. So is it possible that no one is talking about superhero comics because the superhero comic industry doesn't want us to?
I don't know if that explains all of it, but I think that does explain some of it.
Well, I think the one thing of it too is I think that I really believe that a big part of that is that we have that in the fan community. There's been just, especially on Twitter and especially on Facebook, there's been such a push toward this tribalistic view of comics, that you know, X was written by, you know, this disapproved creator, and so we don't talk about it anymore. Or this was written, you know, I mean, you know, you're telling me Mike Barron wrote that book? I'll never read that, right? You're telling me, you know, Chuck Dixon wrote that book? Well, he knows this person that I don't like, so I'll never read that. You know,
and the list grows every day. I'm sure Jason Pearson, I mean, he was added to that list.
Well, I mean, you just think about, like, I mean, friggin', you know, Sean Gordon Murphy had a cover for Doug TenNaples' book, and somebody came in and threatened his entire contract with DC over it, right? To raise a big enough stink with Warner Brothers to threaten his contract with DC over a cover for a crowdfunded book. I mean, that's crazy talk that kind of thing had happened, right? You know, and I mean, of course, that's been happening to Doug for a while, but the fact that, I mean, this is Murphy, for crying out loud, right? Man,
Scott Snyder was getting Scott Snyder was getting
all that because he was on vacation during a Twitter event.
Yeah, he was getting the signals of, if you don't X, we're gonna.
And while that was happening, he was on vacation though, so it wasn't even like he didn't agree with the statement that was going out. He even said, "Well, I was on vacation," and somebody said to him, right?
To be fair, that's Scott's version of events.
Well,
Scott might have been. It's possible Scott was
pretty well, because he came back. He was there on a Monday and was like, "I can't believe this happened." Well, of course I agree with this statement.
Yeah. Like, so, I think Scott might be a guy. It's possible. It's like, I'm going to see where the wind's blowing and then go, "Oh, I'm new to this, and what's going on here, fellow kids?"
Maybe. I don't know him well enough to accuse him of lying, but it seems perfectly reasonable to shut your phone off on the weekend. I used to do that.
It could be.
Could be true. We don't know.
I could see. Honestly, I'd believe either one. Because he seemed
either
pretty
way,
spineless in his response. But
yeah, fair enough. I mean, either way, it doesn't really change the parameter of all of that. So,
So we've come down to this. Nobody's talking about superhero comics, but plenty of people are talking about other kinds of comics. So why don't we make good on the title of this video and give people some comics to talk about?
Ooh, I love the segue. I was going to go there, but I'm glad you did.
Okay.
Lol.
So, well, I actually have some pre-made banners that are just prepared for such an event, believe it or not. So you guys can check out forcesofgoodandevil.net, which has my comic that I did with Chris and my buddy Chris and a bunch of other folks through the years. It's got the main page there. It's all black and white. It's the original presentation with the exception of one page I think we've changed. Because my co-creator decided we had a joke that was too risque, which is fine. But yeah, it's almost 700 pages on there. We also have the first year's worth of content because we started that in 2006. We have the first year's worth of content in color on Webtoon. We are going to be having that up on Global Comics as well eventually, but I need to do some other work before it's ready for that yet. And also, we have started off where the webcomic leaves off, or on this website, picks up on Webtoon. Mrs. H and I are doing a vertical format senior year, where the story continues with her art, which she draws better than me. It's just a fact. So that's that story. So there, also idealcomics.net, where you can have links to all of our stuff. And we've got commentaries on there. We've got webcomic links on there. You can buy, we sell digital comics too. So, and if you happen to be in Scott's, if you happen to be on the Gumroad, but those links are on, you actually have a buy comics link on the idealcomics.net page that takes you to our Gumroad. Or if you happen to be in Scotts Bluff, I will sell you a physical book in person. So there you go. If you're in the middle of a road trip, stop by Scotts Bluff on your way to Yellowstone or something. Nebraska beckons.
One day.
That's my
one
speech.
day.
That's my speech.
I went out on the road in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska to buy a comic book. This is my story.
I've had people do that.
Oh gosh, one of these days when I go west of, Tennessee. It's been a while. Yeah, check out Super Schooled. And you know what, Reese, we should kick off Comics Creators Club this year by doing Super Schooled and Forces.
Ooh,
oh man, I love that idea.
We should start that off that way, and then we kick other people's interests and get other people involved too. But I think we should start this year by doing those two.
I like that because it gives me an excuse to get past page 10 of Super Schooled, and they're thematically similar, so that's good.
Yeah,
Twitless will love that because I don't think there's a single place to use the Patrick Warburton voice.
Oh gosh.
So Super Schooled is I will tell you right now, guys. Super Schooled is a great strip. It's definitely sillier than the Forces. It might actually be funnier, but I think we do drama better. And I think our better jokes are better, but our normal jokes are not as good.
So I do have to hand
first
it
10 pages
Twitless
have been good
for finally giving us a moment of pathos in this comic.
I was gonna say, like, Cartoonix pulled up like the one moment that I was like, you know what, I'm gonna allow a little bit of drama here, and I was fighting every morsel of my being to put it in. But because they're what is it? There's like a whole like phenomenon that some web comics fall into, which is they become drama strips over time. When they started off being comedy strips, they just fall into this inertia, and I've been determined to not fall into that inertia. So we've had, I think, a total of three total pathos moments in like 500 strips. So
we've had definitely more than that. That's large. Several of our characters come from single parent households, so that's a big factor with those. I myself did not, until I was an adult, like, come from a single parent household. So, but yeah, I've seen that wreck a lot of people. So,
Yeah, so check out Super School, definitely. And we got new strips coming up this week. Let's see here. We have one up today, but we had
everybody.
We had a kerfuffle, which was funny.
Well, I'll look back on this and laugh.
Yeah, definitely. And then I definitely have. I guess I should.
Omega Girl.
Yeah, I've got them. Yes. Issue 2 of Adventures of Omega Girl. Please check that out. And if you have read it, please feel free to post a review either on Twitter or on Indie Planet. I got the share screen, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I just hit the wrong one.
Okay. So yeah, this is issue 2 of my classic superhero adventure series. Watch as Omega Girl takes on the Titan of toxicity, Muckraker. And then
issue 2 is fun, guys. Seriously, I finally Twitter sent it to me months ago, and he's like, "What do you think?" And I totally blew him off until after finals week, and I finally finished it. Oh my god, that's a fun issue.
Thank you.
Read it again. Yeah, I want to go back and read it again. It's fun.
Also make sure to check out as Omega Girl faces her greatest challenge yet, a grade school kid. So anywho, so yeah, definitely check that out. And then that's for me. Marm, hit us with your wannabe story.
Yeah. All right, Gene Smith Wannabe Gladiator. I finished page 114 last week. Matt C was right. You hit 100 pages, and then it's like, okay, I did that. Now we got to let's do it again. Let's do it again. All right. And I published a new chapter on Webtoons. That's kind of interesting because I do traditional comics, and Webtoons is a completely different format. So I'm learning as I go. But heartfelt, high octane action with a tomboy farm girl who actually has character flaws. You'll love it.
Signing up right now.
Yeah, I need to catch up. I'm about 2 chapters back, so I need to spend some time catching up on that one.
All right, Metal. Well, Metal's been advertising the entire stream like he advertises.
Yeah, I always do.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
on the ball when it comes to that.
Metal follows advice from Alec Baldwin from Glengarry Glen Ross. Always be closing.
Always be closing.
C.
Yeah. You could find pretty much all of my, not even just comic, but like fictional storytelling stuff in the same world, whether it's comic or I've got some literature and stuff there too at xdynamischaos.com, which I will drop in the chat. Some people don't necessarily like the format of my site because I am not a webmaster and I don't have the time to learn to become a webmaster that well. So I have mirrors on the side that you can find this stuff almost anywhere else, like Webtoon, Tapas, Global Comics, all the different places. And you can read the main titular story of X Dynamis Chaos, which is about a group of friends that have known each other since high school that take on insane odd jobs that no person in their right mind would ever pick up, with like demons and aliens and God knows what.
Vampires and ghosts and
giant clowns. Yeah. Really fun. As Marta said, it's like I'm throwing a curveball at you like every other page to keep you on your toes.
Yep.
I also have On Tour with Mitch and Sandy going on, which is about 2 girls with their kind of like garage band blows up and goes viral overnight, and they have to deal with their sudden fame that one of them decided to take to the limits beyond what they could actually handle. And it's kind of like, I guess, the Hi Puffy Yami Yumi show meets Scott Pilgrim. It's really fun. It's wacky. It's more of a kid's cartoon than the other stuff that I do. And I have the more manga-esque Realms and Relics, which is your kind of adventure fetch quest kind of story where you've got these just normal-ish people, no powers or anything, just some nice gadgets gallivanting across the realms looking for like the rarest treasure in the history of the universe and having to deal with gods and demons and all this stuff that would just end up destroying them if they couldn't outwit themselves in this situation. So, some fun stuff I'm going to try to juggle all 3 of those this year.
Also, we did a discussion of the first issue of Realms and Relics about a year and a quarter ago on this very show, the very first Comics Creators Club. So check out our archives, and you can hear a little bit about Forces and a little bit about Realms and Relics.
Yeah, but the more important part is I've recently been putting it up day by day, flipped versions of it, because I'm going to have the continuance of it going from left to right. So if you struggled to read it in the traditional manga format before, you could just read it like a Dark Horse or Viz 90s comic where they just flipped everything on you.
Oh. Abigail members, she was here. So, is that everyone? Oh, Larry hasn't pitched nothing.
So, if you want to get something I've written, you can go pick up Wild Tales of Curie. I believe Matt still has some of those out there, and we are
CurieComic.com, right?
Yep, and Solid State, my project that it was my idea that I pitched to Matt. We are about to get some actual teaser art from the artist who's going to draw the book. It should be soon. We're getting the script for the artist ready, shined up. So we may have some new hotness to drop on people.
Very cool, very cool. Well, CurieComic.com brings up his current in-demand Curie number 3.
Yeah,
a shop somewhere too.
He did, but
you can get Curie Wild Tales volumes 1 and 2 through the Indiegogo shop.
Yep.
In demand, and that also includes a story co-plotted by me. So
you can also go to mattkrotz.com. He has a whole store, I think, set up.
Oh, is that what it is? Is it mattkrotz.com?
Yeah.
I was going to put the link in the chat, so I was looking it up. Go ahead and do that.
I got you, fam.
Excellent. Thank you.
And I got to say, the hobby of writing a comic book is a bit frustrating when you have to do things like work, deal with family, and other consequences. Like, listen, I just want some time to write. Leave me alone. Stop bothering me.
Don't I know it?
Yeah. Creating is a little bit addictive that way. A little bit like a lot. So also, while I am here, I wanted to take the time to point out Mrs. H. It has a number of comics up on Global Comics under Kappa Cafe. She does a manga style adventure called My Superhero Power Sucks, But I Try My Best Anyway, which is another super teen comedy stuff that is hilarious, but it reads right to left.
Pretty good.
Oh yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff. I try to keep up on that, and also The Adventures of Captain Orange, which is a total 1950s style sci-fi stuff. It is so good, so much fun, and she's going to be launching a campaign for issue 2 on I think Kickstarter in February. So I think that's all of the shilling that we can handle in today. So thank you guys for tuning in. It's been a great 2 hours where we almost talked about our intended topic. Next week, we are going to be talking about my favorite Wolverine comic. And as soon as I hang this line up, I'm going to go find the numbers so I can share it with the panel for next week.
Gotcha.
And the people, because I haven't yet, but I know which one. I just got to look it up. But we are going to be also having my business partner Barry Tetz is going to be on to talk about his favorite Wolverine comic as well. So he's one of the panel members for sure. And I think Twitless, you're on board. Metal, you coming on for that one?
Probably.
Okay. I really wanted to get my artist for Omega Girl on that one if possible.
Okay, well, I will reach out to him. So I know
if really anything gets too filled, I can still do minor production related stuff from the background.
Okay, excellent.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So and also we got a few more slots. So those are the people that I know specifically on there. So excellent. So we will going to go ahead and call it, and then we will see you all next time. And until then, keep reading comics.
And keep talking about them too, apparently.
And yes. My goodness.
Never stop.
Remember, art creates culture, creates art. Later, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.